Today is Monday, July 21st, 2025. I am the interviewer Amy Moritz with Donna Ledwin at the Julia Boyer Reinstein Library. Donna graduated from Nardin Academy in 1977. She earned her bachelor's degree from Fordham University and her MBA from Boston University. She began working in college athletics in 1985 as the manager of athletic facilities and events at Yale. She served as the director of athletics at the College of Notre Dame of Maryland and as the commissioner of the New Jersey Athletic Conference before joining the Allegheny Mountain Collegiate Conference as its commissioner in 2002 until her retirement just this past June 2025. Donna, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome.
So I want to start with, can you remember a time that you first remember falling in love with sports?
Oh gosh, forever. Both of my parents loved sports. We were a very active family. We were 6 kids, and so we kind of had ready-made teams all the time, which was awesome. We grew up in a neighborhood full of families with many kids too. The street was our playground. Our backyards were our playground. We had a playground, and that's what we did. And you know, I think there's, at some point, not that I can exactly remember, that, you know, you're kind of good at something. And I think that was me. I just loved being active. I had good coordination. I had a competitive spirit. And it just gave me a lot of enjoyment and, you know, good feelings about myself when I was out being active. And I remember, I have no idea how old I was, probably about 6 or 7, and running around the neighborhood. You know, we just ran. You know, those were the days you ran around the neighborhood, and would always run there was an older couple who lived between our house and a family on the other side of them. And we're always running back and forth across the street, across the lawns. And I ran across their lawn all the time. And I remember my mom making a comment once that she saw our neighbor, Mr. Willard, and he said to her, "There goes Donna. Her feet never touch the grass. She's running so fast." And that is kind of in my brain, like how my childhood was running around. And then my parents put up a basketball hoop in the driveway, and basketball was big, and football in the streets. And then my parents put a volleyball net up in the backyard. And so all these opportunities to be outside and active, and, you know, it's just something I just really connected with from a very, very early age.
And, you know, you mentioned like in your neighborhood. So where did you grow up? Were you in Buffalo or?
I grew up in West Seneca.
In West Seneca? Okay.
Yep. Right near the old Seneca Mall. And, it, you know, went to public schools through 8th grade. And almost the organized opportunities for girls were almost non-existent. Everything I had really done through 8th grade was in my neighborhood. It was not organized sports at all. And kind of looking, you can sort of see the good and the bad of that. You know, that's a whole conversation. Maybe that's what we're having, this conversation. But I will say, based on what I see now with kids and the need to specialize in a sport and everything's organized, and not that I wouldn't have maybe enjoyed a little bit of that when I was younger, but I think it's the opposite extreme today. And I'm really grateful for what we had as kids, the make up your own games, the hide and seek at night, the just make your own teams in the neighborhood, and I certainly wouldn't trade it. And I feel bad for a lot of kids today for being pushed so much to the organized stuff.
It's almost like the pendulum swung too far.
Too far.
into the organized.
Absolutely too far. So, and, I think, who knows? I'm not a sociologist, but who knows what the function of large families were at that time. People couldn't afford to do all this. Certainly not my family. And, very little, the activities that were organized, though, were for boys. There was the baseball. There was the football. Now, you could be a cheerleader if you wanted to, which no interest there. But, there was hockey. Also, my brothers were the youngest in our family, and they played organized hockey. But for girls, we didn't have it. I didn't have it till high school. And, but I'll tell you a story, when you want to hear it, about how I got into tennis, because it was a function of all of this. Not having organized opportunities for girls, and kind of the societal mindset about what boys should be doing versus what girls should be doing. And I ran against that mold and kind of had to forge my own path in a way. You want to hear about that?
I do want to hear about that, yes.
So, gosh, I would say up until I was about 12, maybe 11. I'm trying to think, early 70s. So, yeah, is when tennis was really big. Billie Jean King and Margaret Court, and then Chris Evert, Martina, Jimmy Connors, McEnroe, Borg. It was just tennis was exploding, and it was exploding on a amateur level. Like, everybody played tennis. Like, it was the pickleball of its day. Okay, so you couldn't get on a tennis court. They were packed. You sat and you waited. Well, I didn't quite know about actually playing tennis. I watched it on TV though, and I was very intrigued by it because I'll call myself an athlete. I was an athlete, and I love sports. And I remember noticing my parents had a pair of wooden rackets in presses in the basement. So that was sort of there, and we never saw them use them. We never played it. So there was just sort of, that was the background of life in the early 70s, around when I was 11 years old or so. So I, as I got older into that age, I would say I was a lot more active with sports than other girls in my neighborhood. And we had, so participation fell off by other girls, but I stayed with it, playing with the boys, playing baseball, playing football, playing dodgeball, kickball, all those things that we played as a small group. And there really was literally a day, and I'll be scarred by this forever, but I'm sort of made it into a positive. It has a good ending, but the bad start to it was I showed up basically one day and they said, you know what, you can't play with us anymore. I was completely flabbergasted, confused. I didn't understand it. And a big reason I didn't understand it is if I wasn't the best athlete out there, I was one of the top 2 or 3 out of all these boys. And I'm like, why are they kicking me out? Like, I'm good. And it was a very wrenching experience. Here's something I loved that like helped define who I was and made me feel good. And I couldn't play with them anymore. I couldn't understand it. I never got a good explanation. I don't know if this came from parents saying you shouldn't. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus with my guesses here. But I find it hard to believe that they all sat around and said, you know what, she can't play with us anymore. I don't know where it came from. But I took my ball and went home. And I had to do something with myself. So I went in the basement and I found the tennis racket. I knew what was going on with tennis. And God bless our next door neighbors. I took that tennis racket out of a the press, found a tennis ball, and started hitting against our garage door. Made, I'm sure, everyone crazy, but I really didn't care, because if I couldn't play over there, then I was going to play here, and too bad. You can invite me to play there, or I can. And I think people probably were clapping and cheering every time I would hit that ball over the top of the garage, because then I'd have to go back and get it, and they'd have a few moments of silence, and then I'd come back and keep whacking at it again. But that's how I learned to play tennis. That and watching TV. Watching Chrissy play, watching Martina play, watching Billie Jean play. And I tried to I went to the library. So this was a funny moment for me. I one day, after I hit against the garage door by myself, got bored, I went to the library. Library is very important to my parents, and that we read. I went to the library and got a book on tennis. And it was an instructional book. And the first chapter was about the equipment, and, talked about the racket, and then it talked about the ball. And it said, a tennis ball has fuzz on it. I read that sentence multiple times, because I assure you the ball that I had no fuzz on it. It was like a rubber ball by the time it came to me. So that was my first big revelation about tennis. Is tennis balls have fuzz on them. So, but it was a great book, and over time. There was another girlfriend of mine who also wanted to play, and we started going out. I was probably old enough to get on my bike and ride to local tennis court. And we started playing, which was great. And then my one brother, who is 4 years younger than me, very good athlete, decided to pick up that, either I talked him into it or he saw what I was doing and wanted to do it. And he and I became tennis buddies. And this is where we would start going to the courts, the public courts, and start playing. And that's where we had to wait for courts, and with the adults, because there were so many people there playing, and we had to fight to get on courts, because the adults would see these two kids, a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, and just sort of dismiss us, elbow us out. We learned to be assertive. And so people would wait behind the courts for a court, and there was a system for getting onto the court, the public court. And when it was our turn, I can't tell you how many times adults would get up and try to go ahead of us. And one day we just said, "Excuse me, we're next in line. We're waiting for that court." And we did. And so sports teaches you so many things. That assertiveness I learned as a kid trying to get onto a tennis court, and so we played, and we took some public lessons at Chestnut Ridge, and I know that there were some on the courts in West Seneca, but I played more and more. By the time I got to high school, I tried out for the team at Nardin, and I made the team, and that was and advancing from backyard volleyball at my parents' house to volleyball at Nardin. Those were my two sports I just took out of the neighborhood and started playing. So, and that was the first time I played organized sports. And by the time I left Nardin, no one has refuted this yet, so I will stand by it to this day. But I believe that I am the first girl from Nardin to earn an athletic scholarship for college for tennis.
Well, there we go. If anybody wants to refute that, please let us know.
Yes,
But
yes, it's out there, very public.
But graduating in 1977, that was very shortly after Title IX. So
yes.
To be able to to do that, so going from and you played with your brother. You took some public court tennis lessons.
Mm-hmm.
But then going from that to Nardin and to teams and trying out for teams. What was that experience like for you when you finally got onto?
Oh,
those
I
teams?
was just so hungry. I was so hungry to be in a team. I'm a very sociable person. I'm an outgoing person. But I never had that sports team experience. It was so exciting. And I loved my time at Nardin. I loved going to an all-girls school. The camaraderie we had, it just, sports was a natural part of that. And to be able to connect with other girls who were also good athletes and make each other better and create that team experience I was just so hungry for that. And it was just wonderful. It was a revelation. I knew it was there because I knew the boys had it. But that was my first taste of it, and it was just exhilarating.
Do you think, or what do you think, especially that time frame? So we're late 70s, even into the early 80s. There were a lot of really great female athletes that came out of the private all-girl schools in the area, because you didn't have to compete with the boys' team, right? There was no competition
Exactly.
at an administrative level with the boys' teams.
Exactly. It's funny. I wrote an opinion piece about this when I was an athletic director at the College of Notre, which was an all-women's college. And it was a commentary about, actually, it was about how I thought the women's college that I was at should have elevated women's sports way higher than their co-ed counterparts because the resources were all for women, yet we were lagging. I couldn't get people. It took a lot of work. I won't say I couldn't get them, but it took a lot of work to get folks in the administration there to understand that we were shortchanging our women. And it compared to the women at co-ed institutions. And the co-ed institutions had, because the men were there, the women were seizing onto Title IX and saying, you've got to do more. But we didn't have that same push at a women's college. But in the high school, we did get all the resources. And it was a different time also. It was, there was a 15 to almost 20-year difference from my high school to when I was an athletic director. And things changed significantly. So when I was at Nardin, the experience of girls' sports really was focused on us and not having to be shortchanged with the boys. Although I'm not sure how long it took Nardin, but I think as everyone grew, everyone could see that, when I was at Nardin, we had volleyball in the fall, basketball in the winter, and tennis in the spring. 3 sports when I was there. I couldn't have been happier, but look at what it is today. Soccer and field hockey and swimming and track and field and lacrosse and now flag football and how much sport, golf, bowling, like the menu of sports is huge now at Nardin and all over, the country. But we were really happy with those 3 sports because we had nothing before then. But then you see the rest of the world and you see the possibility, and you had some forward-thinking women. Jackie Zangi was one of them. She was the athletic director and do everything when it came to physical education at Nardin at the time. She got together with some women at Sacred Heart and Nichols and Buff Sam and St. Mary's and they said, we deserve a league. We need to get together and form this. And it's women like that who were older and smarter, obviously, than we were, who push sports along for girls in Western New York. Until, sadly, and I'm not sure when it happened, the league that they had established, the B. Massman League. B. Massman was a very accomplished racket sports player, especially a tennis player. And they honored her by naming the league that they formed after her. Somehow got absorbed into the Monsignor Martin League. And as far as I know, B. Massman disappeared. And I'm determined to bring that back and serve her legacy again. But I think a lot of folks saw it as just an opportunity to get even stronger. It's kind of when the NCAA took over the AAW. you gained some, you lost some. But I just think those legacies need to be preserved, and we need to do better there.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that when we were connecting before we set up, the interview, we were talking about B. Massman, and I remember early in my reporting days at the Buffalo, I was familiar with the name, and I knew that was where that shift happened, and who knows, right? Whether it was for but to lose her name and that legacy part of it, even if you combine administrations, you've been through administration before. Like, there's many ways that it can function, but still keep a lot of that history. And that's one of the reasons for this project, is we don't want to lose that history.
And I'm so grateful for that, because if nothing else comes out of it is getting B. Massman's name back attached and recognized, we've done something. You've done something.
Well, and like you had mentioned, there was a national surge in tennis popularity. But I think that we may forget, like Buffalo, from my understanding, had a pretty significant tennis history itself too, like the region. Like, there was a lot of good tennis that was being played here. It was very popular, and there was many good players that came out of here as well.
Absolutely. That was a fun scene to be part of. The Muni tournament, and I think back about the first tournament that I won. It might be the only tournament I won, but they called it the novice tournament. I think it was an Erie County tournament, and it was the novice. You can't have ever won a tournament before. Something like that. And I think I won my final match by default, and I don't care.
Doesn't matter. You showed up.
I did, right? And that's what percentage of life is that? Like 80% is showing up, or whatever it is. So, but I actually did have to work to get there, but then I had to walk over for whatever reason. But I'll tell you what else made me feel really good about that moment was, going back to what the environment is now for kids, and parents don't miss a game, and they're the managers and the travel teams and all the camps and all that. Like, none of that. We had none of that. And this is nothing against my parents. They both worked full time. My dad was a pharmacist. My mom was a nurse. They had 6 kids. Like, they were busy people, and I was one of 6. But I'll never forget, I'm kind of bummed out, but for that final match, my dad and my brother both came with me. And that was a big deal to me. It's like, kids expect that now, but I don't know, that's just not the way it was back then. Yeah. I remember my mom coming to, she was a visiting nurse, so she drove all over. She couldn't get to anything. She came to a volleyball match once. Like, it was like the greatest moment of my high school volleyball career. I won a nice award when I was in high school for volleyball, but compared to my mom coming, making that time, it was hard for her to do that. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah. It is a different time, different expectations.
Yes.
I want to ask you about college scholarship, but you brought up the Muni tennis tournament, and I had forgotten to ask you about that. I may still be going on. I don't know if it's still going on. But
I think it was a couple weeks ago.
Was it? Okay. Yeah. Post-COVID, who knows? Like,
what
has happened with some things. Huge, like a huge scene in Buffalo. Like, that was a huge, it's still a big deal, but that was a big, maybe not as big as it used to be.
Right. I don't believe so. Mm-hmm. I didn't check the draw. I don't know. But we had Jimmy Arias and Bobby Bank, and a lot. Just the competition among the women players was fierce. It was. If you go to Miller Tennis Center, you will, and this is only going to appeal to somebody who's a tennis person, I guess, in Buffalo. But the I don't know if it's the Buffalo Tennis Hall of Fame or if it's called the Western New York Tennis Hall of Fame, but they have a wall of all the people who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. And it's a real reminder of all the people, excellent tennis players, male and female, through this area over the decades. And every time I met Miller, I stop and just take a look and read a few more. And, some of them, I will never be on that wall, but I greatly admire the people who are there, and I remember many of them, and well-deserved. And I'm so whoever came up with that idea, kudos to them.
Now, we talked about your, all-girls school experience. But in tennis, there's a lot of opportunity, like for co-ed. You've played with your, younger, but playing with your brother. What was it? Was it when you were, did you play a lot outside of, first of all, did you play a lot outside of high school or not really?
You mean outside of the team?
Yeah.
Well, a handful of tournaments in the summer that everybody played in. But no, there wasn't. Again, well, if it was, I won't say there wasn't. I think there were always junior tournaments. Could you afford them? Could you travel to them? Like, that was just not my family in my life. And it's just, but I would say I didn't even know what I was missing. So when I got to college, though, that I had a taste a bit of that experience. Because when you get to college and you're playing, you're traveling much farther. Even though we were basically in the metro New York, New Jersey area, Long Island, Connecticut, it was way more than anything I had ever done. And to be part of a pretty successful tennis team at Fordham, that was good enough for me. That was, again, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
And I very much appreciated what I had. Very grateful.
More than, I guess I wanted to know if, like, in the tennis community, like, because guys may be playing on the court next to you or whatever, what if there was, was there support? Did you see, and maybe you just didn't have that experience of the guys playing being supportive of girls playing, or like
in college I did.
In college,
but we just didn't have that in high. I think that was just a function of the all-girls high school experience. Sure. But in college, very much, our teams, our men's team and our women's team, connected. We also had a big issue at Fordham at the time where we actually played on clay courts. And, there was a whole, separate from Title IX, there was also a sport equity situation, and it still goes on today, where, look, football is valued more than women's tennis. And the resources you're going to see, but, they're spread out among all teams. But I will say at the time at Fordham, the men's and women's tennis teams felt pretty minimized to the point where we were taking care of the courts. Clay courts take a lot of work. But if we wanted to play and we wanted to practice, we needed to clean the courts. We didn't get shoes. We didn't get, we got balls for our matches or for whatever. And we actually had a little uprising one day and ended up in the athletic director's office, and we're sort of demanding, I don't even know you could call them our rights, because they could choose who they want to, what sports they want to fund, or more or less. But we made our voices heard, and we did it together. And that was really, to me, that was, I think, the first time I had really connected with peers on the men's side to do something for the greater good of everybody. Because it didn't just affect tennis; it was a whole lot of other sports that sort of felt that way too. So I think we made our point heard. They have quite a nice tennis center there now. Might have taken a little bit beyond my graduation, but they got there.
But yeah. And I think, when you're playing, we call them all different things: minor sports, Olympic sports, non-revenue sport. We change what the moniker, basically anything that's not men's basketball or football.
Yep.
But yeah, there's like you mentioned, like apart from title, there's that equity where even other men's sports are, to be treated equally and fairly as well.
And I think if we can connect with men, we're in a much better place with it, but it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. But if we can connect that way, that it's not just a girls versus boys. It's not a girls versus boys issue. It's an equity issue. I think there's an expression, and I think you can apply it to equity and, say equity, it's not pie. It's more for one doesn't have to mean less for another. We're just learning how to share and lift each other up at the same time, and forget the pie. Let's just work together for some balance, and that's what I think I've hoped to accomplish in my career as well.
That's a great segue to your career, because I want to, at what point did you know that you wanted to make athletics either in some way your career, that's where you wanted to go?
So I've always loved sports, but I've always loved writing. And see, I saw myself as being you at one point, a sports writer for a long time. And I don't know. I went to Fordham. I wanted to go to school in New York City. And I went there to be, a communications journalism major, connect with my love of sport. At some point, I got a little sidetracked off of that career path, not in a bad way. I found I was very good at French. So I spent a semester in Paris, and I thought, oh, well, maybe this is where I'm supposed to go, in this direction. And I actually did for a couple of years out of undergrad. But then I knew I loved higher ed. I love sport. I could take my writing a lot of places, and I actually brought it for a bit. I did a lot of sports information work along the way, so I wrote a lot. So I think you get out of undergrad, you get a little taste of the real world. I knew I wanted a grad degree. I went back to school in Boston, big sports town, with Major League Baseball. That I really, we had the Yankees in New York, and the Red Sox in Boston. Like, they don't mix, but I just loved the baseball experience. So I just stayed connected with sport. It was always there. So, but I realized when I went back for my graduate degree that I really loved the higher ed culture experience, and I wanted to stay. That I made that decision that I want to stay there. So, my first job out of grad school was working at Yale in their athletic department, and then you start to refine things as you get into those jobs. You do realize I think I had the revelation at Yale, which was a great learning experience, but there are things that you learn that you want to do, but there's also things you learn that you don't want to do. And I think that's just as important and helpful. So I knew I needed to get closer to students. When I was at Yale, it was much more an events and staff connection kind of job, and I wanted to get more with students. So someone took a chance at the College of Notre Dame on a young woman who maybe had Yale on her resume. That didn't hurt. And but also had a girls' high school experience, Catholic girls' high school, going to a Catholic women's college. And they took a chance on me and as their AD, and it just kind of took off from there. And it just, again, that moment where it just feels right. It's coming together, mentoring and promoting and growing. It just felt like that's where I needed to be. That was the right place.
So then you were at that, athletic director experience. What then made you look at, or what opportunity came to then go to the conference level?
Conferences weren't as big a thing in Division III back when I was in AD. There were conferences. I mean, we were an independent when I first got there, but I realized that that's hard. Anyone who's been in, except unless you're Notre Dame football, it's, being an independent is a very hard road from a scheduling perspective. If you're really good, nobody wants to schedule. If you're really bad, nobody wants to schedule. Like, you need that scheduling component. So I realized, I don't know, halfway through my tenure, that there were other women's colleges like us out there, and we needed to connect. And so I worked with a couple other athletic directors at those women's colleges, and we created, was called the Atlantic Women's Colleges Conference. So that was my first taste of a conference, was putting that conference together. But again, I think other women's colleges were having the same issues I was in terms of getting administration to really value women's athletics. And I think they started to really value women's athletics when they started hitting that enrollment cliff, could see it coming. They weren't there, but could see that bringing athletes into their institution was not just about the athletic experience, but it was about the admissions, enrollment, tuition experience. So we were absolutely huge drivers of enrollment. And once that light switched, there was a lot more support, especially at the women's colleges. So that was my first experience, though, was that Atlantic Women's Colleges Conference. And interestingly, over time, either of those schools went co-ed after I'd left, or got absorbed into other, so the conference doesn't exist anymore. And I'm not sure how many years. It might have been 7, 8 years. And then the ground shifted and folks went different directions. But that was my first taste of it. So that when I got married and we relocated to the New York City area, I had been in Baltimore, I worked very briefly at a women's college in New Rochelle, the College of New Rochelle. And but I had made a lot over the 10 years, a lot of connections all over the Northeast. And that's when I got a call, and I had an infant at the time. So when we moved, so I could only work part-time. I had a baby, and got a call from a colleague at Kean University, and she said, we're looking to hire a conference commissioner. So there were conferences were starting to grow, but they didn't have commissioners. The ADs would rotate in that job. Well, they have a job. Why do they want another? It's fraught with problems, having someone who's trying to run their own institution, run the conference, maintain neutrality. It's not a good scene. So she said, I thought this might be something you might be interested in, and you can work from home. Head explodes. It was, early days of the internet. And I thought, this sounds just like a great opportunity. Like, I know how to organize a conference. I did it from scratch once. They've got it in place. They just need somebody to be in charge of the ship. So that's how it, it was one of these random phone calls. And I got another random phone call like this when I started the job with the Allegheny Mountain Conference years later. It's just funny how things happen. I can't really explain it, but you can go through your own life and say, there is this turning, the boy's not letting me play. Turn to tennis. Tennis becomes a scholarship for college. How crazy. Going to Yale, not where I could see myself long term, but it opened the door to being an AD. The AD led to the commissioner. The commissioner led to a bigger. So it kind of, just trends like that, and it trends around relationships with people and connections you make, and hopefully they see potential and doing a good job and they take a chance.
So I have 2 questions from one's more of an observation kind of question, but back to when you were AD at your women's college.
Notre
Dame.
Yep.
Notre Dame, Maryland, right?
Yep.
First of all, I think that it's, to me, hearing it, I would be like, a women's college, of course, is going to support their women athletes. So was that surprising to you or not? Because I'm not in that culture. So
Yes.
clearly it's maybe a different culture than I'm thinking of it.
Well, I think sometimes it depends on the women's college. When I started at Notre Dame, literally, they had just built a new, it was more than a gymnasium. It was an athletic complex. It had replaced, think of the oldest gym you could imagine. The Riley Center at Bonaventure is modern compared to the gym that they had at Notre Dame. I mean, literally, there was a running track above. It was a very small court. And they told me stories. The gym didn't exist anymore by the time they had repurposed it and added it into this bigger complex. But they would say they had to leave the doors open at one end of the gym because they would make layups in basketball and there was not enough room. Like, they would get crushed against the wall, so they just ran out the door. They would have the doors open at the end of the gym. Try to picture this. It's crazy. So, yes, they were in desperate need of a new modern gymnasium. And I think they looked at it as part of a bigger recruiting situation. They desperately needed it. But I think also there was a little bit of time where they said, well, look, we've got you this nice new gym. What more do you want? Well, I want a space where coaches aren't all in the same office. I want some full-time coaches who can really get out and recruit and build a program. And they could have other responsibilities, but part-time coaches are not going to be, very rarely, are going to be successful. We need a full-time athletic trainer. I wore the sports information hat forever. And I think trying to expanding travel schedules to go from using 15-passenger vans that students were driving and coaches. So drive your van 3 hours, get out and coach, and then drive 3 hours back. To get them to see the reasons, that is not going to help you build a successful athletic program, which is going to attract students to your institution, which is not just going to put butts in seats, as we say, but it's also going to give you good PR when your teams are successful. So trying to get to that next level and say, look, this is not just a glorified intramural program. The difference between that and I'm not even saying a nationally successful program, but a regionally, I think you can aspire to that. So that was where I spent a lot of my time getting them to understand that it's okay to aspire to that there are positive benefits from that. That I think co-ed institutions, male institutions, it just was part of the fabric of their culture. Sports was just such a part of it. And not that sports weren't part of this, Catholic girls, CYO basketball. And, that's always been popular. But really expanding it for women took some work. There's
a difference between just giving you the opportunity and then investing in that opportunity.
Exactly. And, it's really not going to, there was a lot they did. That gym was a huge first step. But there was so much, I don't think they looked, I don't know that there was a strategic plan beyond that about what are we going to do with it. So I was happy to put in the work. And from the time I started to the time I left, we'd gone miles and miles and miles and miles. Mm-hmm. It was a really good feeling of accomplishment there. And I just think hearts and minds changed along the way.
Yeah.
Because we were successful.
That always helps.
Yes.
Right?
It does.
It does. The other thing that struck me is you were talking about getting together with some other ADs from women's colleges, mm-hmm. like to start the league. And like that just to me harkens back to when you were talking about high school and you were talking about the B. Massman. Is that something you noticed in hindsight, or did you know that at the time?
You know what? You just made the connection for me. Thank you. No, it's, if I can extend the Jackie Zangi legacy with this, I'm so proud. But, I never thought of it in that light. I just thought it's what we do as, there's identified the need. Let's get to, we talk and the light goes on among people. But you're absolutely right. I got to believe Jackie Zangi had that same. Thank you for bringing that revelation to my brain. Sometimes it takes somebody the outside looking in to connect those dots.
But also, you never know how you're impacting or the impact that you've gotten from other people until,
Well, and you don't, and I can say I've never, and I don't think anyone who's an educator loses sight of the fact that they are, whether formally or informally, mentoring by their actions. But I really hope that I helped to mentor a generation the way Jackie Zangi did.
As you got into conference work and then Allegheny Mountain Conference too as well, I'm wondering about being a woman in that role. And if there were challenges that you had in that, because we're moving into co-ed institutions, Division III level, right? So just wondering, as a female in that leadership role, what was that like?
I will tell you, this is the gift of going to an all-girls high school. I think it was also, there are multiple gifts that combined. Having a mom who was a career professional, who valued education, passed it along to all of her children. That was not the case in every house in our neighborhood. Who passed it along to being 4 girls first. The 4 older were all girls. We were very used to being in charge. You go to a girls' high school, you're very used to being in charge. I won't say that I wasn't feeling that way, and that's where athletics, I think, really helped me. Athletics gave me a ton of confidence up through, 8th grade, and I wasn't afraid of anybody or anything, and I was probably too much. But going to Nardin, when every position is held by a girl of leadership, everyone has that opportunity. And same thing being at a women's college. I never questioned my ability. I never questioned my right to be there. Never, not once. I never doubted myself. I never doubted that if I didn't know how to do the job, I'd figure it out and somebody could help me. I wasn't going to do it on my own. There was other people. I always had a fabulous support system. So when it came to being a commissioner, which was not what, but when I got my commissioner position with the New Jersey Athletic Conference, I might have been the 5th commissioner in Division III. And then there was an avalanche after that. People just really started to realize we can't keep doing this by rotating it among athletic directors. So, but I got in there fairly early, and I'm trying to think of the other commissioners who were there. I think there were 3 men and there were 2 women. So Division III has always been a very, compared to 1 and 2, a very much more gender equitable division. We have way more women in positions of leadership than the other 2 divisions. And for whatever reason, I don't know why. Maybe, all right, we can speculate. I won't speculate too long, but, we are not the revenue-driven division. So there is a lot more. Even it's not perfect. There is definitely sport inequity, but the revenue generation piece that I think has catered more to men's sports and male leadership has not been there in Division III. So the gender equity, both among commissioners and athletic directors, much better. And I would say I can't say there was a time I ever felt my place wasn't, I wasn't welcome, that I didn't have a place at the table, that I didn't have fear to speak up. And I truly have never felt once discriminated on the basis of my sex or gender. I just haven't. And it's not that it's not there. It is. I recognize it. I see it. But I don't know. Maybe I scare people. I just but I think our mindset is maybe a little bit different in Division III, and but I had a lot of great mentors, and I took a lot of lessons from the get-go. You know, I think the last time I felt discriminated against was that day on the playground. Uh-huh. Since then, you know, I didn't look back.
Okay. You know, you mentioned like Division III, and is a different. It's a different animal than Division I, or definitely Division I, and particularly in the changing landscape. Do you think that like the athletic scholarships also plays a role in making it, I don't want to say easier, but gender equity is different, or I don't know.
I think it helps, but there's still a whole resource allocation that has to be taken into account. Right. There's as well as, and resources includes coaching. You know, what sports have full-time coaches, what sports have part-time. You know, if all the men have full-time coaches, all the women's sports have part-time coaches, like we got a little issue. Everyone's got coaching, but, you know, looking at that. But I think scholarships do add an extra level of pressure or potential for getting things out of whack from a gender equity perspective that we didn't have to deal with.
In your time with the Allegheny, because that was the longest. Was that the longest?
Yes.
Yes. What did you see change for female athletes in your conference at the Division III level?
I think we added more sports. I worked very hard, just because it was a personal mission to be, not that other commissioners or other ADs are not aware of gender equity concerns, but it really was always high on my radar. And I think if there was anything, I really like to think that from the time I started to when I left, that I left things in very good balance in that respect. If we added, you know, a men's sport, you know, there was a women's sport to be added. If we had a certain kind of award, you know, our awards, there was no, if you were a men's basketball player or you were a women's swimmer, your awards were the same. And you have to work, though. It can be easy to let little suggestions from people knock that out of kilter till the point that you don't realize. All of a sudden you look at it and go, oh, you know, we really are doing a lot of things different. I always had my radar up about that. So I'm hopeful that I left it in a better place. But I also worked very hard from a professional development standpoint for coaching, because the issue of women coaching women remains an issue. And I worked very hard to mentor our women's coaches across members of the conference. We did over the years several different professional development days, bringing in speakers, learning not just about Title IX, but about personal work skills and team building, and that I take for granted, but they may never have had. So, and allowing them to connect as women, and I think that's something I take a real pride in, leaving, knowing women in the conference have connected. The senior women administrators, the coaches, have been they've been encouraged to connect. And that just makes us better. And I know it when after I do something like that, the cards I get back from it. And it's not that I'm not supporting our men's coaches as well. They have opportunities to do professional development on that. But the fact is the women have been underserved. And my job is to make sure that there's better equity there.
Well, and it's still societal norms where if you have a family, most of it falls on the woman in the relationship versus the man in the relationship. And so have you, in your time for coaching, I know you talked about like pretty good equity with administration, but when we're talking about specifically, it's a big topic, women going into coaching. Has the needle moved at all with that?
I don't know. I don't feel it. And I don't really like to be that squishy about it, but it is hard. I see a lot. Here's how I think I don't think it is. I see a lot more turnover among women coaches than men's coaches of male coaches of men's teams. There's women's coaches of women's teams. There's just a lot more turnover. What's going on there? And I don't know that college athletics is built to support families, period. I think a lot of our men struggle with that. I know, especially there's a lot of ADs in our conference who are relatively new dads. And it's hard. We've talked about it just informally. It's hard, and they'll joke about, my wife's going to leave me if we do any better in the playoffs, because then I'm going to be gone for another week and stuff like that. But there's real problems at home, and I would like to think that folks, that institutionally administrations are paying more attention to that, because athletics is different than academics in that respect. Faculty members schedule those classes, at convenient times for them, for the most part, not always, but for the most part. Whereas coaches, everything's in the late afternoon, early evening, or early morning, and then they're on the road. And I remember one of the bigged compliments I got from a coach back when I was at Yale was working in my office one night, and she came in. She said, "What are you doing here?" And no, something like that. And I said, "Well, I have things to do, and there's stuff going on here." And she said, "You don't know how good it makes me feel that you keep coaches' hours as an administrator." A lot of administrators absolutely keep coaches' hours, but I think it's something they are very aware of. And if we're not aware of that, then we're letting them down, because they are making a sacrifice. And you wonder, it's a young person's game. It's a young unmarried person's game. They have to get their footing early, make a name for themselves. Try to do that when you've got a family and you're young. It's not successful. It's too hard. So I do think, but the fact is, women have to carry a higher burden to this day, and it's almost where it's a revolving door that's hard to fix. When I was at here's a talk about counterintuitive. When I had my son, I was in my last year at college in Notre, a women's college. They had no maternity leave policy. A women's college. I'm like, I'm not the first one to be pregnant here. This was crazy. Luckily, I had a whole bunch of sick time set up because I always went to work. and I ended up using that. But after I left, the year after I left, they actually did institute a maternity leave policy. But that's like, if women aren't supporting women that way, how are we expecting someone who's never carried a baby for 9 months and then had to come back and work a job and do it successfully? How do we expect them to succeed? So stuff like that has happened in my life that is hard to believe. But the change was made, and that's the good news. So, and they let me bring the baby to work in the afternoons. I didn't want to leave the baby at daycare till 6 o'clock at night, so I'd pick him up at 2 and brought him back. And, look, these kids just loved, they want to hold the baby. My assistant wanted to hold the baby. Like, it was just the best place to bring a baby. But, to be more accommodating that way. And I see that more. I see coaches bringing their kids to, to work, to games. And that's being encouraged. And we have to do that. We just have to do that.
Well, and my last question for you is, what does Title IX mean to you?
Oh, it's my life. It really is. It's when Title IX happened, I can't, what was I? Title IX, I was 12, 13. It was early. I was just starting high school. So, full circle to this conversation, women were starting to be seen as beyond figure skaters, and really, it's still a lot of people will say figure skaters and tennis players. Thank God for the WNBAs. Thank God for, now there's professional women's soccer, professional women's softball. The list goes on and on and on. But so it would have been tennis or figure skating, and I couldn't skate. So I'm much more related to the tennis part. Title IX happening when it happened made all the difference in my life path. So I could go from being a playground player and a public courts tennis player to really making that part of my education, making that part of my career, using it to, the force of the law to move my career along, and use it to grow both sport and the role of sport in higher education. That was my path. That's what Title IX meant to me. And I would love to just say right now, Title IX, there's a great misconception to this day that Title IX was only about sports. And that is so not true. And I look around, it applied to any kind of funding in higher education, and discrimination based on sex. And so it helped academically, it helped create more scientists and engineers and lawyers and doctors and college presidents. And so as much as we latched on to the power of Title IX in athletics, it had a much broader effect. And I could see that everywhere I went as well. So that meant Title IX for my sisters, who were all incredibly accomplished women, in large part because of Title IX. I just happened to benefit from the sports aspect. They had it in many other aspects. So I very important that I leave that thought about how important Title IX was to the whole landscape of higher ed.
Right, because it's like you said, like we latch on to the sport, but without Title IX, you wouldn't have had open women to law school and medical school and all those other professional schools that were denying women access.
Or, denying them or giving them such a minuscule quota. Mm-hmm. Do you know the story of Sandra Day O'Connor? Sandra Day O'Connor graduated from the top of her class. I think she went to Stanford, top of her class. You know what job she was offered after she graduated? A law secretary, a law firm secretary. That was the sound of my head exploding again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Title IX changed it. Yeah.
And it sounds like you believe this, but how important is it that generations today, young girls, understand the importance of that law?
It's critical, and I think we have to be careful to, just because I know how I'd be, when our parents would talk about, well, when I was a kid, blah blah blah, and it's like, that switch goes off. But to say to them, there was a time when you didn't have all these travel teams. Can you imagine that? Look, what is the expression? Those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it, and we cannot accept that Title IX has cured everything for girls and women in sports. And the best way to do that is to continually educate on the history. And in my opinion, every boy, girl, man or woman in doing any kind of a sport should be educated in what Title IX means to athletics at some point in their career. If every coach of a women's sport doesn't educate their girls or their women in what Title IX means to the current day experience, they've let them down, and they're setting them up to run into the same problems over again. Because without the hard legal fights, as we see today, things that we took for granted can be lost again, and we can't let that happen.
Donna, thank you so much.
Thank you.